Hello, fellow entrepreneurs. Welcome to my channel where I read and summarize books relating to being a better entrepreneur. I've met no one who I thought was wise who didn't read. I believe reading is essential for those who seek to rise above the ordinary. So today, we will be learning from Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, Science and Practice. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Robert B. Cialdini, the author, has been through it all. He's always felt like a scapegoat, someone who can be easily duped and manipulated. That's why he's devoted his entire career to understanding why people obey others' commands. He's conducted several experiments on the subject, but he's also gathered information by interviewing compliance professionals and watching them work. We will cover 6 basic principles of manipulation, as well as the most common persuasion techniques used by compliance professionals. You'll not only be able to defend yourself against deception after reading them, but you'll also be able to put these techniques to use yourself if you want to flex your persuasive muscles. Part 1. Shortcuts appeal to our brain, and they can be used to manipulate us. Turkey mothers are wonderful mothers who love, protect, and nurture their children. However, if you look closely, you'll notice that this tenderness is only held together by a single thread. If a chick makes the distinct cheep cheep sound, the mother will tenderly care for it. If the girl does not comply, the mother will dismiss it or even kill it. The cheep cheep sound is so convincing that even a toy of the turkey's arch enemy, the polecat, will elicit tender care from the mother turkey if it cheeps loudly enough. The sound is a simple shortcut for the mother turkey that allows her to quickly, and in most cases, reliably identify her chicks, triggering maternal instincts. We humans like to think of ourselves as intelligent, which is why the mother turkey shortcut may appear to us to be quite stupid. However, we all use psychological shortcuts that are very similar. This is due to a simple necessity. The world is a complex place where we can't possibly consider all of the implications of every decision we make. As a result, we take quick shortcuts, which work well for us most of the time. One example of a shortcut is that if someone gives us a reason, any reason, we are much more likely to do them a favor. In order to better understand this phenomenon, a researcher asked people in line for a copy machine if she could skip the line. She discovered that if she gave a reason for her request, "May I skip the line because I'm in a hurry?" 94% of people agreed. Only 60% of people complied if she didn't give a reason. Surprisingly, even if she gave a nonsensical reason, "May I skip the line because I need to make copies?" 93% of people still followed through. People appear to have a mental shortcut that considers any reason to be sufficient for granting a favor. Worse, just as scientists can deceive a turkey into mothering a stuffed polecat, so-called compliance professionals such as advertisers, salesmen, and con artists can deceive us into abusing our shortcuts. They usually do this to persuade us to meet their demands, such as purchasing a product. The overused price indicates quality shortcut is one example. People often assume that expensive items are of higher quality than inexpensive items, and while this assumption is often partially correct, a shrewd salesman could use it against us. Do you know that souvenir shops frequently sell out-of-fashion items by raising rather than lowering their prices? Because dealing with life's complexities necessitates the use of shortcuts, we must recognize and defend ourselves against manipulators who would lead us astray by convincing us to use those shortcuts incorrectly, unless of course we end up looking as stupid as the poor mother turkey. Reciprocity, scarcity, consistency, social proof, likability, and authority are 6 basic psychological principles that we use as shortcuts and that can be exploited for persuasion. Part 2. Reciprocity. Humans have an insatiable desire to repay favors. Have you ever received something from a stranger on the street, such as a flower or a free sample of something? Do waiters occasionally bring complimentary sweets with your bill at restaurants? These gestures, as innocent as they may appear, are actually relatively simple tricks to influence your behavior. The rule of reciprocation is the first psychological principle of persuasion. We feel obligated to return favors. This rule underpins all societies because it allowed our forefathers to share resources with the assurance that they would be reciprocated later. And we feel a psychological burden if someone does us a favor and we do not return it. This is partly due to our society's contempt for those who do not return favors. We label them as moochers or ingrates, and we are afraid of being labeled as such ourselves. You might wonder how strong the desire to reciprocate is. It can be seen, for example, in long-term bilateral relations. Consider that in 1985, Ethiopia was likely one of the world's poorest countries, plagued by poverty, starvation, and disease. Despite this, the country's Red Cross sent $5,000 to earthquake victims in Mexico City that year. Why would this desperately poor country send money to another country so far away? Simple. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, Mexico sent aid to the country, and now is the time to repay the favor. People are so eager to get rid of the burden of reciprocity that they will frequently do much larger favors in exchange for small ones. In a 1971 study by psychologist Dennis Regan, for example, a researcher named Joe pretended to be a fellow participant and bought test subjects a 10-cent Coke as a favor. Joe later revealed that he required a favor. He was attempting to sell as many raffle tickets as possible in order to win a prize. Would the subjects be willing to assist him by purchasing some? The subjects who had received the uninvited Coke bought 50 cents worth of tickets on average, which was twice as much as if no Coke had been given. Even though some participants claimed they did not like Joe, the feeling of indebtedness seemed to outweigh likability. Some of the participants bought Joe's raffle tickets despite their claims that they did not like him. Clearly, this was a case of abusing the reciprocity principle. Because Joe was the only one in the situation who had true freedom of choice, he not only forced a debt on the subjects by buying them a Coke, but he also chose the method of reciprocation. The Krishna organization in the United States used this strategy to great effect in the 1970s. They gave flowers to passerbys on the street, and despite being annoyed, people frequently made donations to the organization to satisfy their desire to repay the flower gift. So, what are your options for retaliation? As previously stated, reciprocity is essential to the functioning of societies and social relationships, so it is impossible to ignore the principle entirely. You can, however, learn to recognize and resist intentional attempts to abuse it. Begin by asking yourself whether the favors you receive are genuine, or if they are an attempt to manipulate you. Consider whether you truly want to donate your money to that nonprofit organization, or if you feel obligated to do so because you were given a gift on the street. And don't worry about not returning favors that are really just disguised manipulation attempts. Favors deserve favors, but tricks don't. Part 3. Starting with an outrageous request and backing down from there can help you win a negotiation. When we're negotiating with someone and they make a concession, we'll feel obligated to reciprocate, just as we want to repay favors. The rejection then retreat strategy is what it's called. When a Boy Scout approached him on the street to sell him tickets to the annual Boy Scout circus, Robert Cialdini witnessed this firsthand. After Robert Cialdini declined to buy the $5 ticket, the boy asked if, since he wasn't buying any tickets, he would at least buy $1 worth of chocolate bars. As a result, Robert Cialdini found himself purchasing 2 to match the boy's concession when he retreated to peddling the less expensive wares. What makes rejection then retreat such a powerful persuasion technique is that it takes advantage of the contrast principle. When 2 items are presented to us, one after the other, the difference between the second and the first is magnified. As a result, the boy's $1 chocolate bar appeared disproportionately cheap in comparison to the more expensive circus ticket. The principle is simple. If you want something specific from a negotiation partner, start with an offer they are almost certain to reject. Then, back away from your initial offer and focus on what you truly desire. This will most likely be perceived as a concession by your opponent, who will feel obligated to make a similar one. Labor negotiators frequently use this strategy, beginning with extreme positions and gradually retreating while extracting concessions from the other side. However, researchers have discovered that there is a limit to how far you can go with your opening position. If it's too outrageous, you'll be perceived as a bad faith negotiator, and subsequent concessions will be ignored. Presidents have been brought down by the rejection then retreat strategy, as seen in the infamous Watergate scandal. In 1972, President Richard Nixon's re-election seemed inevitable, but a man named Gordon Liddy managed to persuade the committee to re-elect the president, CRP, to give him $250,000 to break into the Democratic National Committee's offices. Liddy used the rejection then retreat strategy, which was a ridiculously risky undertaking. He began by proposing a $1 million scheme that included kidnapping, mugging, and prostitution. The CRP felt they had to give Liddy something for his concessions from his first scheme, even though his later second and third proposals were still scandalous and incredibly ill-conceived. In addition, when compared to the initial outrageous $1 million proposal, the $250,000 scheme involving mere burglary didn't seem so bad. As you are probably aware, the burglars were caught, and the ensuing scandal forced Nixon to resign. Part 4. Scarcity. When opportunities become scarce, we become even more fascinated with them. Have you ever heard advertisers say, "Only for a limited time. This is your last chance. The sale is over in 2 days." There's a reason why advertisers emphasize that a sale won't last forever. The scarcity principle says that if something is hard to come by, we're more likely to buy it. We humans value opportunities more when their supply is limited, and this appears to be because we hate missing out. One of Cialdini's students discovered in a 1982 study that when shoppers were told about a limited-time meat sale, they bought 3 times more than if there was no time limit. This effect was amplified when people were told that only a few people were aware of the sale. Customers who were unaware of either limit bought 6 times more meat as a result of the scarcity of both the offer and the information. So, when does scarcity start to have a significant impact on our decision-making? There are 2 requirements that must be met. For starters, we are more likely to want something if its availability has recently decreased rather than if it has remained constant over time. This is why revolutions are more likely to occur when living conditions deteriorate suddenly rather than gradually. The sudden drop increases people's desire for something better, prompting them to take to the streets. Second, competition makes our heart beat faster. Whether in auctions, romances, or real estate transactions, the prospect of losing something to a competitor often causes us to become overconfident. This is why, whether true or not, real estate agents frequently inform buyers that several other bidders are also interested in a particular house. Even among seasoned negotiators, a competitive situation can induce a feeding frenzy for a scarce good. Consider the case of Barry Diller, a TV network executive who was regarded as a mogul due to his success in the entertainment industry. Then, in 1973, he paid $3.3 million for the right to broadcast the Poseidon Adventure on television, only once. This was the highest sum ever paid for a single screening of a film, and ABC later estimated the deal would cost them $1 million. So, why did Diller pay such a large sum of money? Simple. This was the first time the rights were sold to networks in an open bid auction, with competing bidders' bids visible to one another. This sparked an irrational bidding war among the buyers, and when the dust settled, ABC's rivals were actually relieved they hadn't won. Meanwhile, Diller was adamant that ABC would never participate in another auction. To counteract the irrational desire to possess something due to scarcity, we should always consider whether we want the item because of its utility to us, for example, its taste or function, or simply because we want it. When scarcity is used against us, the latter is frequently the case. When something is prohibited, it becomes extremely desirable. People only want what they can't have, according to the old adage. There is some truth to it, to be sure. Parents, for example, frequently observe this phenomenon in their children. If a child is expressly forbidden from playing with a toy, it becomes far more appealing. This effect exists in the adult world as well, which is why censorship is such a double-edged sword. When information is prohibited, it is valued higher than if it were freely available. For example, a study conducted at the University of North Carolina in the 1970s found that when college students were told that a speech opposing co-ed dorms would be canceled and banned on campus, they became more sympathetic to the idea, even before hearing a single word of the speech. Similarly, courtroom research suggests that censored information has an impact on juries. When juries know that an insurance company will pay the bill, they are more likely to award plaintiffs larger damages. Surprisingly, if the judge specifically instructs them to disregard the fact that the defendant has insurance, they award even higher damages. The forbidden information appears to be more relevant to them, causing them to overreact, just as a forbidden toy appears to any child to be extremely desirable. This holds true for more than just information. Consider the case of Florida's Dade County. Residents began smuggling and hoarding large quantities of phosphate-based laundry detergents after it was declared illegal. They also began to see phosphate-based detergents as better than before. The Romeo and Juliet effect is named after the fact that parents who erect barriers to prevent their children's romantic relationships often succeed only in deepening the lovers' attraction. When parents try to interfere with their children's relationships, feelings of love and desire for marriage only grew stronger, according to a study of Colorado couples. When the interference was reduced, romantic feelings tended to diminish as well. The Romeo and Juliet effect, like scarcity, stems from the fact that humans despise missing out on opportunities. Part 5. Commitment and consistency. We want to honor our commitments and be seen as consistent. Imagine you're lying on a beach, taking advantage of a well-earned day off. It's a hot day, and you're itching for a cool dip in the pool. What will you do with your wallet and your keys, though? Is it possible to conceal them? Alternatively, ask a nearby sun worshiper to keep an eye on them. According to a study conducted by psychologist Thomas Moriarty, asking someone is probably a better idea than you might think. Only 20% of people on a beach who witnessed a staged theft of a radio from a neighboring towel reacted, according to his findings. If the owner of the towel had first requested that people please watch my things, 95% of the neighbors would have become near vigilantes, even chasing down the thief and forcibly reclaiming the radio. Why? Simply put, we humans are driven by a strong desire for consistency. We want our actions to match what we've said. As the study revealed, this desire is so strong that it appears to outweigh concerns about our own safety. This desire for consistency stems primarily from the fact that it makes life easier. We don't have to decide how to respond to each situation that arises if we can simply stick to our previous decision. This type of automation aids us in navigating our increasingly complex world. What, on the other hand, determines consistency? The answer is straightforward: dedication. According to research, once we make a verbal or physical commitment to something, we want to stick to it. And the most powerful driver of all is public commitment. For example, after the Korean War, Chinese interrogators used this tactic to persuade American prisoners of war to collaborate. They first asked them to make minor concessions, such as writing and signing statements like, "America is not perfect." However, when these statements were read aloud in front of the entire prison camp, the prisoner was frequently labeled a collaborator by his fellow inmates. Surprisingly, the prisoner began to see himself as a collaborator as well, becoming more cooperative with the Chinese interrogators as a result. He was able to successfully adjust his self-image to match what he had previously written down, and having the commitment in writing was also crucial in this process. There is something inexplicably powerful about signing one's own written words. The well-known foot-in-the-door sales technique capitalizes on how even small commitments affect our self-image. Salespeople's first goal is to persuade prospects to make a small purchase that isn't even meant to make a profit. Rather, it is a small commitment that transforms the prospect's perception of themselves into that of a customer, making them much more receptive to a larger deal later on. So be cautious the next time a salesperson asks you to buy something, no matter how cheap it is. Part 6. We value something more when we have to work harder to obtain it. When a new member is inducted into a group, initiation rituals commonly involve pain, degradation, and even death, from African tribes to college fraternities in the United States. Efforts to stop the brutal practices are always met with obstinate opposition. But why is that the case? Simply put, the groups performing these rituals understand that when people go to great lengths to obtain something, they are more likely to value it. Members become more committed to the group as a result of the effort required to gain membership. However, interestingly, some groups, such as college fraternities, have resisted efforts to turn their initiations into community service, such as changing bedpans in hospitals. This is simply because they want members to take the internal decision to participate in the degradation, rather than making excuses like, "This was for the good of the community," which would allow them to justify their actions with an external justification. To make the internal decision, they'll have to persuade themselves that it's worthwhile, which will require elevating their opinion of the group they're joining. Indeed, research has shown that such internal decisions are more likely to result in long-term inner change than decisions made under duress. Compliance professionals, such as salespeople, can use the lowball trick, for example, to try to induce inner change in us. A car dealer may make such an unbelievably low offer on a vehicle that we immediately decide to purchase it. The dealer is aware that during the test drive, we will invent several other reasons to buy the car aside from the price, such as its good mileage or attractive color. The initial great offer is retracted at the last minute due to a bank error or some other flimsy excuse, and we are quoted a more expensive price. We usually end up buying the car for reasons we came up with on our own. Another facet of our desire for consistency is this. To counteract this deception, simply ask yourself if you would have made the purchase if you had known the true price beforehand. You should leave if the answer is no. Part 7. Social proof. We look to others when we are unsure. Have you ever wondered why laugh tracks are so common in sitcoms? In fact, studies show that laugh tracks make us laugh harder and longer, especially at bad jokes. This is due to the social proof principle, which states that we frequently decide what is the best course of action by observing others' actions. Even artificial laughter, in the case of the laugh track, helps persuade us that others find the jokes amusing, implying that we should as well. This dynamic is also employed by church ushers who salt collection baskets with a few bills prior to the service to make it appear as if everyone is contributing. It's why companies often advertise products with phrases like best-selling or fastest-growing. It gives customers the impression that they're not alone in their purchases. When we are faced with uncertainty, social proof becomes a particularly powerful influence. Consider the case of Kitty Genovese. who was fatally stabbed outside her New York apartment building in 1964. The young woman's cries for help were heard by some neighbors, but no one intervened or called the cops. Outrage was sparked when the media reported that the neighbors were callous and unconcerned about their neighbor. Although it was later discovered that some neighbors had yelled out their windows or called the cops, the case is still being studied as a perfect example of bystander inaction, in which people are less likely to help a victim in an emergency if others are present. According to psychologists, the bystander effect is primarily caused by two factors. First, when a large number of people are involved, each participant's sense of personal responsibility is diminished. Is it possible that someone else will call the cops? Second, it can be difficult to recognize a true emergency, especially in a city. Is the man on the sidewalk in need of medical attention? Or has he simply had too much to drink? Is this a scream of a murder victim or a fan of a thrilling football game? When faced with uncertainty, people turn to the actions of others for guidance. People were trying to sneak a peek out their windows in the Kitty Genovese case, so this may have signaled to others that inaction was the best course of action. So let's say you're in the middle of a crowd and have an emergency. How can you effectively seek assistance? The safest bet is to pick one person out of the crowd and issue a clear help request to them. You, in the green shirt, call an ambulance! This way, the person will not be able to avoid taking on the responsibility and will not require assistance from others. As a result, they'll almost certainly be of assistance. Part 8. Likeability. People who are similar to us can have a big impact on our decisions. People, as we've just seen, often look to others for advice on how to act, and this tendency is strongest when the person being observed is similar to ourselves, as evidenced by how vulnerable teenagers are to their peers' opinions and fashion choices. Our proclivity to imitate others also results in a rather sobering statistic. When a suicide is widely reported in the media, the number of people killed in plane and car crashes skyrockets the following week. This appears to be a perplexing phenomenon at first glance. What could be the cause? The answer appears to be that after reading about a suicide in the newspaper, some people decide to commit suicide themselves in order to emulate the victim. Some people decide to make their deaths appear accidental for a variety of reasons, and some of them will do so while driving or, frighteningly, flying. As a result, there is a rise in unexplained crashes. Unfortunately, these aren't people who should have committed suicide anyway. According to research, every front-page suicide story effectively kills 58 people who would otherwise live. The Werther effect is named after an 18th century novel that inspired a wave of suicides across Europe, ostensibly in imitation of the protagonist. This effect appears to be strongest for people who are similar to the person whose suicide was publicized. When young people read about another youngster's suicide, they are more likely to commit suicide themselves, whereas other people are more likely to react to news of senior suicides. This dynamic is also why marketers frequently use advertisements featuring, mostly fake, interviews with regular people on the street who endorse a product in a less tragic setting. Ordinary people make up the largest potential market for any product, and they value a recommendation from someone who looks like them. Make a conscious decision to be on the lookout for fake social proof to avoid falling into this trap. Because the dialogue is clearly scripted, you'll be able to spot the fakes most of the time. When you do find them, you should avoid all of the company's products in the future, as they deserve to be punished for attempting to deceive you with phony social proof. We comply with people we like, and some people have an easy time making us like them. Have you ever attended a Tupperware get-together? If you go, be sure to notice how well the business model uses compliance tricks to its advantage. The concept is masterfully crafted from reciprocity, where each attendant receives a gift before the buying begins, to social proof, where each purchase strengthens the view that similar people are also buying the product. The greatest trick, however, is that the party invitation did not come from the Tupperware presenter, but rather from someone who every invitee likes, a friend. Why is this such an effective technique? We are, on average, more obedient to people we like. In addition to leveraging our existing friendships, as Tupperware does, astute compliance professionals also know how to turn on the right switches to make us feel like a person. For one thing, they know we're suckers for flattery and gravitate toward people who are like us in some way. This is why salespeople frequently compliment us and claim that we have something in common. Wow, that's a nice tie, and blue is one of my favorite colors as well. Another factor that influences whether or not we like someone is their physical attractiveness. Attractiveness causes the so-called halo effect, in which we perceive attractive people to be intelligent, kind, and honest. Worryingly, we even tend to vote for candidates who are more attractive in elections. Another important factor in liking someone is working together for a common goal, or seeing them as on the same team. This factor is used to great effect in the infamous good cop, bad cop interrogation method. After a suspect is verbally abused by the bad cop, the kind and understanding good cop defends the suspect, appearing to be a friend and trusted confidant, and thus frequently eliciting a confession. Finally, the things we associate with people play an important role in determining their likability. Weather forecasters, for example, have received death threats simply because they are associated with bad weather. When we hear about something while eating delicious food, on the other hand, we tend to associate the topic with the positive feelings elicited by the food. To guard against likability manipulation, consider whether we have developed unusually strong feelings for someone or something in a short period of time. If that's the case, it's possible that you've been fooled, and you should be concerned. Part 9. Authority. We blindly obey authorities. We are taught from birth to always obey those in positions of authority, whether they are parents, teachers, doctors, or police officers. Unfortunately, we don't think or challenge perceived authority figures before obeying them, because this tendency to obey authority is so ingrained and powerful. In the 1960s, renowned psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a study that revealed that volunteers would give potentially lethal electric shocks to others simply because they were told to by an authority figure. Despite the fact that no one was hurt, the experimenters were taken aback by the results. Consider a nurse who received written instructions from a doctor, an authority figure, to treat a patient with a right earache. Administer the medicine in our ear. She proceeded to place the drops in the patient's anus, and neither she nor the patient paused to consider how this might help him with his earache. This is a great example of authority stifling independent thought. If we don't have any reliable evidence of another person's authority, we estimate it using symbols of authority. Titles, for example, are extremely powerful tools that have a significant impact on how we perceive others. When confronted with a professor, for example, we not only become more respectful and accepting of their opinions, but studies show that we also perceive them to be physically taller. Clothes and props can also be used to convey authority. The figures in white lab coats and clipboards convinced participants in Milgram's experiment that they should obey them and torture their fellow test subjects. Con artists take full advantage of these symbols as power by dressing up in uniforms, suits, and even priest robes if necessary. Of course, there are some authority figures to whom we should pay attention, such as judges and doctors. But how can we avoid those who take advantage of our deeply ingrained desire to obey authority? Being aware of authority's power is already a first line of defense, and we should ask ourselves 2 questions to quickly and easily determine whether or not an authority figure should be obeyed. First and foremost, is this person a genuine authority figure, or merely posing as one? Is it true that their credentials are valid in this situation? For example, from 1969 to 1976, actor Robert Young was known for playing the titular doctor in the TV show Marcus Welby, MD. He also became the face of Sanka Coffee in a number of commercials, which were very successful because people mistook Young for a doctor and an authority figure, despite the fact that he had only played one on TV. Simply asking if his credentials for recommending Sanka Coffee were valid would have exposed him as a phony authority. When confronted with an apparent authority figure, the second question to ask is, how honest can we expect this authority to be in the situation? Are they looking out for ours or their own best interests? A waiter, for example, may be an expert on a restaurant's wine list, but he or she may also profit from recommending more expensive wines. So there you have it, the techniques experts use to sway you. Reciprocity, scarcity, consistency, social proof, liking, and authority are the 6 fundamental principles of persuasion that you should be aware of in order to protect yourself against them. We humans like to use predictable shortcuts to guide our decisions in many situations to avoid thinking about how we should react. Advertisers, con artists, and salespeople, for example, take advantage of these pre-programmed human reactions to elicit the response that is best for them, not for us. They use principles of reciprocation, scarcity, consistency, social proof, liking, and authority in particular. Because we won't be able to stop using these helpful shortcuts, we'll have to learn to defend ourselves against manipulators who take advantage of them. This wraps up the summary from the book, Influence, Science and Practice by Robert Cialdini. Thank you for sticking out through the very end of this video. Nothing helps out my channel more than y'all watching the entire video. These videos take a long time to make, and is a labor of love. If you would like to contribute by buying me a cup of coffee, I'll leave the link below along with the link to this book. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe and watch these videos that might pique your interest. I'll see you on the next one. Until then, keep reading.